Welcome everyone to another episode of Notes from the Aleph. An Aleph is a high place from which all things are visible, and from our vantage point we'll be looking at tabletop role-playing games, their design, and the theory behind those designs. Around here our motto is be fair, build up, and have fun. I'm your host GriffinVarro, joined today by our editor Theta, our local designer Norman Rafferty, and our good friend GM RedRabbit, and our other good friend Lessons Learned. When it comes to tabletop games, I have 15 years of experience writing, playing, and frequently fixing. Problematic rule sets the table. Pronouns are he, him, they, them. And, of course, we have Rafferty.
Hello world, I'm Norman Rafferty, he, him from Sanguine Games. We make alternative games.
Red?
I'm RedRabbit. I do professional GMing, currently running our Ironclaw game on Wednesday. I also run 5th edition D&D, 5th edition Vampire the Masquerade, and sometimes Dungeon World. I consider myself a student of narrative and game design.
Lessons.
Lessons learned over at YouTube and Lessons Learned 1 over at Twitch right here. The one is important. I'm a writer of speculative fiction. Knights and Stars is on Amazon for 99 cents. I'm also a budding designer and a GM over at this channel on Sundays at 6 o'clock Eastern, playing and running at Advanced Dragons, World of Greyhawk, Into the Wild Coast 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons game.
All right, then. So, on one of our previous podcasts, we stopped to talk about games that nobody talks about, because in the end, there are a lot of games out there to fit different themes, play styles, and involve wholly unique settings as well. So, it's possible that at your table, you've heard your fellow players saying they like X, Y, and Z, and found the perfect system for them, and this game could be precisely what they're asking for, but they might turn it down and ask, why can't we just do that, but with D&D? So it can be a little tough sometimes within the hobby to break people out of this D&D enabled shell and experience something different and better suited to their preferences. So here today we'll be talking about exactly how to do that, how to attract the casual D&D fan base to other games as both designers and fellow players at the table. So who wants to kick that off?
Ooh, I could.
Do it.
I wanted, so during research and prep for this particular topic, I was thinking about, like, what is it that attracts people to Dungeons and Dragons in the first place? Because it is, I think, unarguably the most popular game right now. It also likes to call itself the greatest game, the longest running game, etc. But so I was thinking about it personally, and I broke it down to a couple different things. I think when looking at a game, I think people are attracted to the aesthetics of it, which I would consider to be like the art of the production, the dice that you get to roll, the way the character sheets look. People can be attracted to the simplicity of a game, such as like having jumpstart rules, or if it's a game that advertises itself as, oh, you just get playing with, a sheet of paper in like 2 minutes. Hi, cat. But also, similarly, people can be attracted to the complexity of a game. Oh boy. Very smooth. Sorry about that, everyone.
Yeah, just put the cat on the mic. Come on, let's do it.
Just cut to the chase. So I think, especially in the case of D&D, people can be attracted to the complexity of a game, knowing that a game has a ridiculous amount of character options, that there's new rules coming out all the time, is something that I think buoys Dungeons and Dragons. And I think the last thing, and this is specific to D&D, is that I think people are attracted to it because it is this generic fantasy. And we've been talking about this over the week too. But I've been thinking, and Rafferty has pointed out that he doesn't think that it can even function as the fantasy. But I think if you compare the genre, the fantasy genre presented in D&D to genres like science fiction, a lot of things can be crammed into the D&D setting. Whereas if you're talking about a science fiction game, it's never just a science fiction game. It's a spacefaring game, or it's a gritty cyberpunk game, or it's some sort of strange, like, time looping game, time travel game. Whereas most fantasy that you and your friends can come up with could get crammed into under the umbrella.
Oh, I gotta fight you on that. You can't do Once Upon a Time or Grimm or Charmed or Harry Potter. Is Harry Potter not fantasy?
Well, I would counter that with
urban fantasy.
Now they're talking about a new. They're talking about, I think it's another one of the Magic the Gathering settings called. Nope, I don't remember the name, but it's a bunch of Harry Potter kids hanging out learning spells, and they're turning it into a D&D setting book. So people do this stuff.
Well, you can package anything as a D&D. In fact, like I would suggest that there's one other thing, Source, you're not mentioning, which is people watch Critical Role or Dimension 20 or Harmon Quest or whatever, and the people who are hosting those shows say they're playing Dungeons and Dragons or hint at it. And so people saw, well, I saw this show, that looked like fun. I'm going to go ahead and get Dungeons and Dragons, do it. And you can do whatever, like you just said, like people will say you can do whatever you want with Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, you can even do science fiction. There's Starfinder out there. You know, people are told you can do whatever you want. Now, you might play it and discover it doesn't work very well, or you might be doing people also take whatever house rules they're using and call that Dungeons and Dragons. So that's another reason why a lot of folks are doing that. Is like they're not playing D&D, they're playing some incredible like Ship of Theseus problem. This is homebrewed to hell and back, but they call it D&D, so I'm going to tell everyone else it's D&D.
Well, maybe I'll put that down as another attractor then. The fact that D&D has convinced most people that anything you want to do in the tabletop space, you can do with D&D. And it's Strixhaven? I don't know. But that's the setting I'm talking about. Look for it in a game store coming to you soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean,
I blame OGL for that.
Well, I don't think like D20 had a good. Remember, there's even a version of D&D Vampire overseen by Monty Cook, because there's D20 Vampire.
I'm sure.
So I can turn to RedRabbit and say 100% true. You could. Why are you playing Vampire the Masquerade? You could be playing Dungeons and Dragons Vampire instead.
I've been rocked to my very core.
Yes, there was, Call of Cthulhu and everything else. But that I think kind of veers into the something I don't know we're going to discuss as well, which is the no system is universal situation, right?
Right. You want to build it around a certain thing that's happening.
Yeah. Dungeons and Dragons promises that it can be universal, but no, it's assigned to you to go to the dungeon, take the treasure, and do the thing we talked about many times before.
Question is,
how do we encourage people to play other games? Well, from a friend, if you're the friend who's sitting with your other friends in the flags, with a wall of D&D stuff and then something else, it could be as simple as, you take a conversation from Star Trek or whatever. It's like, I mean, I don't know about D&D because I'm not into fantasy, but I love science fiction. And you go from that conversation. Now, the trick from the designer point of view is, I'm going to design something I want to play, because that's probably, that most people want to do. Not everybody does it. And then you go like, okay, how do I sell what I want to play? Do other people want to play that as well?
And I'm going to be I'm going to be
the first one to say I have a lot of ideas that I'm pretty sure other people will never want to do.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm going to be the big meanie stupid head.
That's okay.
And like a big problem a lot of times is you'll get a lot of provincialism. You'll get somebody saying like, hey, there are other games other than D&D. Here's a game where we're all biscuits of shredded wheat in a bowl, and like we all like talk about our feelings, but how this makes us feel. And here's a table, we can roll, see if you've got like how much sugar you have on your frosting or whatever. In other words, like you'll see these little tiny things I love to call like darling games, which are like some bizarre kind of thought experiment that sounds really cool and sounds really cute. And you read it and it's like, oh yeah, we're all raccoons trying to steal trash. That sounds kind of cool, but because they're not very well fleshed out, or they're just written as kind of, like amusing exercises, many people are going to get very bored very quickly, or lost, because it's like way too high concept. Like I wanted to pretend to be a kobold for a couple hours, and you gave me this, a high intellectual exercise about what does it mean to be serial. We need to start getting away from that. It's kind of like, there's a middle ground between everything is D&D and incredible high concept stuff. So I mean, like accessible games that people would enjoy in a group setting with social and parasocial relations. We need to concentrate on that sort of introduction. So let's stay away from, the foreign French film and get a little closer to what people might actually enjoy casually.
Because I think you're introducing another problem there, which is beyond the one shot, right? Beyond that first session where you do convince your friend to sit down and roll some die, and they're like, okay, this is going to be this. And then 15 minutes to an hour later, whatever, they're like, yeah, I'm going to go to the bathroom. And they just...
Or stare at the phone. Well,
they never come back. They're like, whoa.
I mean, because obviously there's introductory level and advanced level. Like certain... One thing I'm always railing against is when people say D&D is generic fantasy, and I'm saying, no, it's not, because in order for it to be generic, you have to know what D&D is. D&D has rigid concepts of what a dwarf is. They have rigid concepts of what an elf is. If I had only seen LOTOR and The Hobbit, multi-billion-dollar franchises, I would be confused when I came to D&D and found out that elves were weaker than humans. That's not what was in the movie. I don't understand. I would be doubly confused why everyone keeps coming back from the dead. I understood that was something rare and strange. And then you teach the player that. And so a lot of times when I'm talking about role-playing games, people assume that how do we get them into the hobby? They must already know what D&D is. Everyone knows what D&D is. D&D is the generic. And I want to stand up and say, no. People know what Harry Potter is, they know what Twilight is, they know what Lord of the Rings is, and they might know computer games. Maybe they've played World of Warcraft, in which case now, when people say, why are my elves shorter and weaker, you could say, it's like World of Warcraft. And if they know what World of Warcraft is, they'll say, oh, okay. But if they've only played Guild Wars or Final Fantasy XIV or Genshin Impact, they won't know what you're talking about.
Right. So, they will wonder why the elves don't have ridiculous eyebrows.
Yeah, and I think this brings up a good point that maybe the easiest way to convince people into trying something new is, of course, to have those touchstones. And they go, man, I love that latest nondescript superhero movie that I'm not naming. I bet we could run a game like that. And you go, well, I have a system for that. It's called Hero System 6th Edition, and it'll scare you out of ever trying that again.
Well, Ryan, I've talked about this before. Ryan Dancy, who used to work for D&D, talked about the learning tax, which was the idea that what will scare a lot of people away from your game is if they are expected to know a lot before they get into it. Like holy crap, EVE Online. Or to use a more mainstream example, most people don't want to play Smash Brothers. Because immediately, even though that's supposed to be a nice friendly game, it's a fighting game. And when we start talking about hyper armor, like what is this? I'm gonna go play Minecraft. So the ultimate, like the two big examples of the most accessible games are Call of Cthulhu and Vampire. And the reason why those are accessible is because, okay, you ready? I hope you're sitting down. It's just like the world you know now.
No.
And in the case of Vampire, the reason why Vampire is hugely popular is because it's just like the world you are now, only you're way more awesome.
Yeah. You see, that's great, because I already think I'm awesome, so I could be even more awesome. That's great.
I know, isn't it great?
I love this pitch already.
There we go.
I realize this is going back and refuting a topic that we're already kind of left a little bit, but I think that in terms of familiarity, I'm going to disagree with Rafferty again, but I do think that there is a cultural understanding of fantasy, and I think part of the reason why it does matter and it does feel familiar to D&D is at this point I think D&D has been very instrumental in shaping that. But I will say that you don't have to have seen Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter to know what a wizard looks like. You know what a dwarf looks like, even if you've only ever watched period dramas about, I don't know, businessmen in the 70s. Like, people know these things, and I think that D&D, when you dig past the surface, yes, there's nuance in there, and how effective that is to be debated. But I think that in general, people know pretty much what to expect when they come to D&D, even if their flavor of fantasy is not exactly what they end up getting out of the core rulebook. But I do think that plays to your point that familiarity is an important tool to selling these things, much in the way that Vampire and Cthulhu say, like, hey, it's just like real life, except you're sexier and the gods have tentacles.
Right. Or like the big selling point is I saw them play this on Dimension 20. So I want to go ahead and play this. I mean, I'll tell you right now, like my relatives know I make games. They've never bought my game, but they have gone out and bought Dungeons and Dragons because they saw it on Dimension 20 and Critical Role.
So that's the real key, is get a high production value game going on Twitter or Twitch.
Works for Will Wheaton.
Yeah.
So
see our Twitch stream live at 2 p.m.
To be fairly, it's like that. The Will Wheaton effect didn't work for modern age the way it was expected, but that was a very short game anyway. But I think another form of saying what you're saying, the tax is called a low or high barrier to access, right? Because another thing we talked in areas is like the cost of books and stuff like that. Why should I spend $50 for this thing that I don't really understand, right? And things like having easy startup rules or a lot of free rules, like a 1 page or 2 pages, like I can grab them and play them. If I don't like it, I can throw it away, but I haven't made a monetary investment, because when you make a monetary investment, in a way, you're also making an emotional investment. Because now you put a price on something, whether
Speaking as the angry indie person here, of course, that says so. Never play an indie game. Only play stuff that's SRD and for free, because never invest in indie games. It's a waste of your money. And I'm gonna roll that back, because I am, of course, being sarcastic here. It's like a lot of the indie games are one of the big selling points for indie games like Powered by the Apocalypse and Blades in the Dark have been, let's have the character sheet. Bear with me now. The character sheet's 1 page, and on that 1 page is all your abilities on this 1 page, spelled out, plain English. Like, that's the huge selling point behind Dungeon World. That's why I would actually recommend Dungeon World before I would recommend Dungeons and Dragons, because making a character in D&D is a confusing ordeal. Making a character in Dungeon World is making a couple checks and a couple boxes.
You're being very generous to Dungeon World today, and I'm loving it. So just so you know, I'm drinking it up over here.
I think a lot of the Powered by the Apocalypse games are also like this. They give you a sheet, everything is there, just check mark the things, and you're already done. That's pretty quickly.
When I met people who are new to role-playing games, they some of the ones we were designing, they said one thing they really liked was to be able to look at their sheet and see on their sheet what it says that their character can actually do.
Right, so they don't have to reference back to the book, turn to page 250, read what medicine says, and see, like, wait, medicine doesn't heal people.
Well, it's also inspiring. One reason why the Iron Claw sheets have that matrix on them of showing how all the abilities stack up is because we would get people in new people who were new to the game were saying, well, I normally wouldn't have thought about trying to negotiate with him, but I noticed on my sheet that I had a bunch of stuff all listed on the negotiation line on my sheet. And so I felt empowered to try this because I had all these numbers there on the sheet, because apparently I'm a good negotiator, because they just happened to pick a character mix that was good at it. And in that way, the player, even though they were new to the game, they said, well, I'm looking at my sheet and it says I'm good at this, so I'll go ahead and try this. And that made them feel empowered about it. So the Powered by the Apocalypse games and stuff like that are very good about having, like, when you ask them, what do you do? Many of them will look at their sheets and see what they can do. If that sheet's an incomprehensible mess, they're not going to know what to do.
I think also playing to archetypes and stereotypes works a lot well. Like, for example, let's say that you're playing in sci-fi games, like, sci-fi could be anything, but hey, you can be a cowboy cop in sci-fi space. Well, I've seen a lot of that. I can do that. That's not very complicated. It's a cop that happens to be in space, so he is in my cheat. I can be that, right? Or I can be a rugged, not ranger. It's very specific, but that could be a captain of a ship, stuff like that. That if the game, it clearly illustrates what it's putting up front, and it matches that idea people have in their heads. Because I think that's one of the things that happens when you have the first session. Is like, I thought this was going to be like this, but, and that but is the exit. Right? They check out because they cannot get into that mental space of playing the game that is required.
One of the huge problems I've run into with players is when they'll say like, "Hey, I wanted to play D&D with this folks," but then they spent like 4 hours shopping, and I was so bored.
Yeah,
and because I'm like I'm gonna always say my big joke: there's no bad games, just games that have trouble getting players to show up. If someone was new to the hobby and showed up at the game, and then later said, "Sorry guys, I can't make it next week, I'm busy," and they make out and drops out. They might have been busy, but no one really tends to notice when people are making polite excuses, to get out of it. Sometimes people didn't enjoy the experience. And gamers often tend to be nerds and not very good at reading social cues. I know it's the opposite of being a good GM and reading the room. But there'll be people who are frustrated and will drop out of the game. That's why I always encourage. I like the fact we've seen a trend in modern gaming to be friendlier to the player. The X card, which is an optional rule you can introduce in the game, you can look this up online, which was if someone feels uncomfortable or upset, they can throw the X card on the table and we have to stop, take a breather, and redo what we were doing. That's a good open state because there will be players who, like you guys, are rapidly blathering numbers and telling me that if I do something wrong, my character will die. And some people will get stressed out when you said I need to solve a math problem or I'm going to die. Like that can be stressful for folks. So giving them outlets where they can evoke that. And now we're also seeing a trend where people are saying that the very setup of the game can make them uncomfortable. A lot of games, consciously or unconsciously, are written very confrontationally, or with many certain assumptions built into them. That
you mean people don't like audit phases? Are you serious?
Some people feel some language may be ethnically determinist or ableist, and may make some people uncomfortable. And I know there's a big discourse of we were at a game or what. We're not talking about making the game. Make the game however you want. That's fine. We're talking about if you invite someone to the table, certain aspects of the game may make them uncomfortable. So you either have to find a game that doesn't have those, or you need to find a way to soften that blow. Like a lot there's a lot of criticism of D&D 5. We just did a podcast on this where D&D 5 has a lot of ethnic coding built into the game. And some people are not, are reading that. Whereas there are many games out there that go out of their way to be more inclusive to folks, or even better, are just inclusive in general. And so you might have a lot more headway with games like, Vampire that are automatically outspoken of having a lot of diverse members of their cast. And so if you want to get someone in the game, like we keep talking about generic fantasy, a lot, sure, a lot of people know what D&D and Tolkien is. There's a lot of people who also know how loaded those games are. And that's why they may steer certain way. You may want to reach for something that isn't as loaded as those are.
Yeah, like I said in an earlier podcast, you have to make the effort, as I've been talking about, meeting the players at least halfway. In other words, because then I talk about the two paragraphs, the paragraph that is for the beginner player and the paragraph that is for the experienced player. And often the problem when people say that is that you have the paragraph of the beginner player, but that's all you get. After that, it's like, oh, now the people who really know how to play these games, this game's for you, because everything after that is just assumes that you know what you're doing, right? Or in some cases, it assumes that you're complete ignorance of anything. You don't know what even dice are. And so it's like, well, I'm not an idiot. I do know what dice are. I just want you to tell me how to play this game. It's okay.
Right. But if we switch back to video games for half a second, every single one of them, or most of them, will start off with, hey, use WASD to move around.
You'd be surprised.
You'd be surprised how many people don't know that because maybe they've never played before.
And I have gotten players who say, thank you for explaining how to read the four-sided die because I didn't know how to do that.
Yeah, but many games can't really balance that. Either they have the 2 paragraphs, but either once you jump to the third one, it's either one or the other. They they don't have that sort of duality or translation. Like, we want to accommodate the people that don't know how to use a 4-sided die, or that even it existed, because most people think of dice D6s only, right? Never seen a D20 before, then you know what it is. Perfectly understandable. But everybody who's played role-playing games knows what a D20 is, even though they never play a game using a D20.
Yeah.
Unless it's Japanese, which they usually use D6s anyway. And
oh,
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, like, okay, I want to talk about a paradox that shows up with attracting this stuff, which is the idea of franchise. As a publisher, I have often been told that licenses are considered to be very, good. Like, make a Star Trek role playing, and people will buy it because they've heard of Star Trek. Make the Game of Thrones role playing game because people have heard of Game of Thrones, they go play it. But I have personally noticed there's a paradox of this, because you run into 2 huge problems. Here's a franchise. You've heard of Game of Thrones. Everyone's heard of Game of Thrones. Here's the role-playing game. Now, usually I run into 2 problems. Number one is the game is, many of these franchise games are terribly written. Like, I don't know if any of you have played the Game of Thrones RPG.
I have not.
I have
a
not,
Game of
but I
Thrones
do
fan.
assume. I do generally assume that licensed products are not as well crafted as original IP in all
Weird,
areas.
because they're more likely to lure people in. It's like, I heard Dungeons and Dragons was for nerds. I've watched Game of Thrones, a show specifically sold to me that it's Dungeons and Dragons for adults.
It's sexy.
Right. Yeah. Like, D&D is for baby nerds. Game of Thrones is for people who like sex. So Game of Thrones appeals to me more because I'm a mature gamer. I mean, that's I'm not making, you guys all agree I'm not making this up. Like,
No, you're not making this up. The entire advertising point of it is that, it's more mature because there's more sex.
Right. And I don't want to, also, or they might be invested in the storyline. It's like, I liked Game of Thrones. I didn't enjoy Dragonlance. So I would rather play a game that's based off of Game of Thrones. But then one problem you'll run into is when you get the game, and like, Game of Thrones was very incomprehensibly worded because they wanted to have some mechanics where NPCs were quite, I don't know. It was not friendly. Same thing with like the Dresden Files RPG. Dresden Files RPG is like a 400-page brick that they drop on your foot. They've got Dresden Files Accelerated now. So all you guys about Dresden, moving on. Or you'll run into the problem where, because it's a franchise, everyone has different baggage on how to do it. The big example of this is Star Wars. Star Wars is one of, I got people watching. Star Wars is one of the worst role-playing games you can play, especially with a newbie. Because everyone shows up and everyone wants to play a Jedi. And then everyone who's had experience with the game says, you can't play a Jedi. The rules are broken. They don't work right. We already have one. We don't need more of them because we have more of them in the party. It makes it more broken. So immediately you've already set up a wall. Someone said, I saw Star Wars and I heard about role-playing. I'd like to play my fantasy. And then someone shows up and you punch them in the face saying, no. And like, that's what scares people off. And that's
depending on the edition. Because there's one edition. No, I disagree. One was broken and the other one they fixed it. And then they broke it again.
The thing I'm describing right now happened to me every edition of the game, including the current Fantasy Flight, where
that one, yeah, that
because I want to play a Jedi, and you tell them no. Like, that's one of the weird paradoxes of the franchise. People are more likely to buy the franchise because they've heard of it and lure them in. But paradoxically, you're going to have you're almost definitely not going to get someone in with a franchise. By the way, you should buy our Usagi role. I mean, to be more true, that's why we wrote it specifically. We addressed that because we made an Usagi Yojimbo role-playing franchise you haven't heard. But our first one was too complicated. Like, we had people saying, like, we didn't understand this game. And so when we made the second edition, people were right. This might be your first role-playing game. And so a lot of stuff that was in our new edition of Usagi Yojimbo is, it's got a lot less rules. Now, I get people complaining, we liked your first edition, it had more stuff in it. It's like, yeah, it had more stuff in it, but new people who were showing up were scared of all of that, or it was too complicated, or it was being used against them. They showed up and the learning tax was there. So because it was a franchise game, we said, if it's going to be a franchise game, we need to be approachable to new people. And so honestly, even though you might think playing a franchise game might lure people in, I would suggest you'd be better off saying we're going to play Starfinder and letting someone play a homebrew Jedi than you would be trying to rest. Because I guess you're running the third thing, which is the lore nerds. Oh my god.
But there weren't any Jedi around there. They all died. There were exactly 5 of them that got added in post after the fact. And all of them happened to be over on this one planet training all the Padawans. It doesn't end. It really doesn't. I've been there.
That's a problem of gatekeeping, particularly, right? And
yes,
a much larger
exactly.
concept. But also something we talked in an earlier episode about rules is encouraging behavior. Does a franchise, franchise type of game encourage and rewards the people that know and master the lore?
Mm-hmm.
Or not?
And I'll tell you right now, no, because you're going to run into the problem that Lesson mentioned earlier, which was the idea of the game master who really wants to tell a story, who really has a big scripted story written out. And you might not read their fanfic, but you showed up for their tabletop game today. And so they're going to write up a whole bunch of NPCs who are really cool. They have access to all the rules, so they can, have the force power that keeps their body together from being disintegrated. I forget who the guy was. He's a legend now.
Scion.
Thank you.
You're
Or this obscure lore, and they can stream all of this together because they're writing their big fanfic and they're presenting to you. And somebody who just came in casually saying, well, I saw the movies, and, I kind of thought it was cool to have a laser sword. It's probably... You'll get game masters who get into those bad habits without understanding that they're not here to present their own fanfic to entertain people. The primary goal of a role-playing game is to make the people who showed up today feel like they're having a good time.
Right. And in a way, you're writing their fanfic, which they've already written 6 pages of backstory for.
Right. You should be their fanfic and building on that. And that's, I think, it's the paradox. People will buy a franchise game because they've heard of it. It's the ultimate paradox because D&D has its own fanfic, but people just ignore it. You could try getting someone with a franchise, but if you do that, know those pitfalls that many of these games, like some folks said, are bizarrely obscure systems, so you have to watch out for that. And secondly, don't fall into the trap of trying to make your own fanfic with it. Remember that when someone showed up, you want to make them feel like they're having a good time. You want to make it easy and fun for them.
Right. And this is why maybe you want to try advertising for something adjacent to rather than exactly the same thing. You don't go, hey, you like Star Wars, let's play the Star Wars one. Like, hey, let's play this space opera game. Oh, you like Breaking Bad. Here's this gangster game.
That's where I'll agree with Red. That's the big selling point of D&D. D&D isn't Lord of the Rings. If it was Lord of the Rings, we'd have to... Hey, why don't we just get on the birds and fly to Mordor? Don't have to answer that question in D&D. D&D is generic, whatever I want.
I read about Morgoth and the Song of the Ancients, and now I understand each and every wizard that's out there, and I'm going to go and find the blue wizards that went across the sea and ask them for help.
The weird, the weird paradox I have, I'll show up at D&D and say, I want to play Elminster.
Yup.
Why not?
I want his big hat.
Right. And it's the paradox. If I show up and say I want to play Elminster, people say you can't, that's not in the rules. But Elminster is part of the setting. I know it's that weird, but you can get away with that in D&D. On the other hand, if you sell people in a franchise, you'll have a much bigger problem. So
did you see Dune? Here's a game called Fading Suns. Enjoy.
There you go.
Oh God.
I have not heard of that one, but it sounds like it's a future.
I know Fading Suns. You would not want a newbie to play Fading.
No.
A big problem. We are getting away from this, so that's good news. D&D 5, whether that's false or not, is a very empowering game. Powered by the Apocalypse and Blades of Dark are incredibly empowering. You show up, you have 50% or better odds of pulling stuff off, and and you feel awesome. Vampire, same thing. If you have 2 freaking dots in a skill or 3 freaking dots in a skill, you have better than 90% odds of getting at least 1 success. You have
1 dot into power, you just do it.
Yeah, well, you can act. When we ask you to make a roll, you're likely to make the freaking roll. You're likely to succeed. This is way different from a lot of old school games and a lot of homebrew games. Like in Call of Cthulhu, you might show up with only a 30% chance in freaking everything if you didn't know what you were doing or whatever, and you'd feel like an incompetent loser. And nothing makes someone feel like an incompetent loser like when they sit there quietly because they don't know what they're doing and they make one roll every 30 minutes and all they do is fail it.
Yeah. I mean, that's going back to the video game design thing. That's another thing that I think you see in game design that maybe not forward facing, maybe not if you're playing video games. If you're studying them and if you're trying to make them yourself, not saying I have that particular experience, but you find that a lot of stuff that you want to do is way too subtle for the person playing to ever pick up on it, and you need to make like kind of large impactful changes for them to register meaningfully to the players on the other end. And that is something that I think that is being carried forward in a lot of these games. And you said empowering players, because they do say like, oh, hey, you know, you're a getaway driver, which means that you don't have to, we're getting away. We don't have to roll dice. Just do it. Like, you've got this power for a reason. Knock yourself out. Which I think helps people grasp the concepts a lot sooner too. There's a lot less of that, like, wait a minute, my sheet says that I'm this kind of badass rogue, and yet I can't sneak past anyone. I couldn't do any of the stuff that I should be able to do narratively.
Right. Now, I have a rule for that when it comes to dice, and I think this Ironclaw also has a similar situation, which is, when do you ask for? And this is you have to spell out pretty quickly in the book so people can understand, you know, especially the beginner player. When do you ask for a dice roll? And the rule I use is something like this. I'm paraphrasing myself, so it's going to be clumsy. You only ask for a dice roll, right, when failure is an option and that failure has consequence.
Yeah.
Don't roll when it doesn't matter.
Exactly. Yeah. Don't roll when it doesn't matter.
Only roll when it's interesting. And I'm always a big proponent of saying, don't roll if you're not ready to deal with the failure. Because I've been in way too many games where, we roll, the GM said, well, just roll. And I roll, I succeed. Well, that's not the way I want the story to go. So you fail anyway. Like, you do that.
Yeah. Or like my favorite is the group perception rolls. It's like, okay, you enter into the room. Everybody give me perception rolls. Okay. 3 of you see this, which really means everyone has seen it, and you were probably going to see it anyway because I kind of need you to see this for the plot to progress.
Yeah, it's like, the DC's 20, but you rolled like a 17, and you said you were paying attention. It's close enough, right?
Well, to get back to newbies, one of the things I always want to emphasize with books is that the purpose of the role-playing game is to tell you what you're not allowed to do. Like, if you say, we're going to play D&D today, I say, fine, I'm going to be Deadpool. You would say, no, you can't be Deadpool. You can't play someone who instantly regenerates and uses guns. Regeneration and guns are not powers we give to starting level player.
But I can play the troll gunslinger.
Troll is not an option. Right. But troll and gunslinger are not options in D&D. So you wouldn't be allowed
to go to Pathfinder for that.
I mean, even then you might tweak it and just say, well, here's troll gunslinger. It's kind of like that, and tweak it. But I would say, no, I want to be Deadpool. Someone just posted a link here saying how to play Deadpool. Also, I want to be obnoxious and make weird Ryan Reynolds homophobic comments in the game. No, you can't do that.
Oh, nothing can stop me.
Can't stop
me. One of the things, getting to the nitty gritty of how you do this, you have to be clear what you're stating your game is. This is my game, right? This is what we're doing. And the more concise and clear upfront, the better. So signal posting.
In theory, the game is supposed to do that. I mean, I'll just stand up and say, in theory, the game is supposed to tell you what we're doing with it. In practice, people will say, D&D is generic. You can do whatever you want, which is kind of like, well, if this game lets you do whatever you want, then you need to sit down, because the thing I'm going to get is no preconception. If someone has never played a game before, or only a couple of them have never played with you, they don't know anything. Don't assume they know what an elf is. Don't assume they know what they're supposed to do and what they can't. And this got into a previous session we just had, which was, don't assume they're going to do what they're supposed to do. Like Griffin and I pointed out that a newbie player is more likely to try to trick or to negotiate or to do sort of underhanded things or sort of clever things when they get into encounters. They will jump up on tables and swing from chandeliers or hide, try to backstab or sneak away or talk to people. They will do all the things that your first impulse as a GM might tell them, okay, shut up. That's not going to work. Just move over here and stab them like you're supposed to, because this is a combat encounter and none of what you're doing is appropriate. And that's how you lose new players, because you told them it's a world of imagination. By the way, it's combat time. Stop imagining.
Speaking of explaining things to people, even in D&D, I think, when you bring in people to that, you do have to kind of explain what a medieval town actually is supposed to look like, or how it's supposed to look like in the game that's about to be run. Because people have really weird interpretations about what's supposed to be there, and as from one of our previous things, a lot of people just assume it's a video game town, and there's like, oh yeah, there's the weapon shop, the magic item shop, and the potion shop, and I guess that's what their whole economy is, right?
Well, D&D has those, so we don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, D&D has those, but then again, it's like, wait, so D&D, there's kings, and it's a feudal society, right? It's like, well, yes, but actually no. It's actually medieval capitalism. I think you've described it before as such.
Well,
it's strange, and you have to explain it.
A lot of fantasy settings aren't historical, so you all walk around fully armed with no IDs, swearing loyalty to no crown or god, and people tolerate this for some reason. Oh yeah, sure, you've got a staff of wizardry, it can blow holes in buildings. Go right ahead and move freely, stranger who doesn't speak my language.
Sure, your ability to destroy the entire country in a single spell will never come up consequentially for us.
Oh, wait, did I say you don't speak my language? We speak one universal language!
Yes, as all people on Earth have always.
Well, but also, more importantly, like you get to a game like Vampire. The one thing that frustrates me at Vampire, but is obvious there for new people, is like, you're a vampire, you're part of a secret society. Welcome to your other... Here's the guy in charge of you and their assistant. Here are your 4 other fellow player characters and their entourage of ghouls who also know vampires exist. Let's move to the vampire bar with his 30 other vampires. And it's like immediately you're in this, like, welcome to the vampire club. Turns out there's dozens of us. And this is just in this city.
Yeah, right. That takes getting used to and explaining. You have to preface players. This is what's going to be happening.
But it's also in there. Yeah, it took a while to explain that to me as a player because I wasn't like used to the idea of. You mean there's like hundreds? There's thousands of us. It took a while to explain to me that that in Vampire you're all 20 years old because. But moving on. Yeah, no, I mean, like no preconceptions. The important thing is when we talk about be fair, build up, and have fun, a newbie player is going to come to your game and like all this assumptions of what they know, none of that is true. They're a newbie. By definition, they shouldn't know anything. Maybe they do, but don't assume that they do. And it's this process where people start beating out of them their creativity. Start telling them, stop trying to be weird in combat. You're slowing it down. And making all of our fights take 2 hours. You're a bad player. Stop that. And, and it starts to shut players down. Some of them will still hang around once they learn what they're supposed to do and learn the wisecracking. And other ones will, like I said, stop showing up. And, but actually we're getting into newbies like this. This is also like getting them to play other, probably we're talking about how to get them to play other games.
This is related,
well,
for sure.
I mean, that's the thing. It's like, if the game of choice, D&D, forces you to do that, then other games should encourage the things that the players want to do, right? So if you want to swing from the chandelier, it's like, hey, you want to swing from the chandelier? Yes, that sounds like a cool idea. Okay, this game actually allows you to do that and encourages you to do that.
I think what Griffin was getting at, some other games might be more realistic than other stuff. Like, for example, people were used to D&D and you're bringing them to Vampire. It's like, we kind of want you to not jack cars, steal cars in the middle of the day. That might be violating the masquerade because it might be getting like bad attention, that kind of stuff. Like laws apply here.
You're dead. You might have a driver's license, but you're dead. If the cops stop you, there's a problem. Don't do it.
Make sure you get a fake ID before you buy beer, or explaining to folks. And you might have to if you're playing a more Call of Cthulhu, for example, is even a more mature game because you're playing like a one person without superpower. So you might have to stop and explain, to them. I mean, this gets into the D&D and video games tend to be very player empowering. So you will have to reward the players with the idea that of telling them that this different experience is somehow fun. I bristle at the idea that D&D is the default fun, but it is for a lot of people.
Right. So I guess let's go ahead and get... Yeah. Oh, you were about to say something? Question?
Oh, no.
No. Oh, I got confused there. All right.
I got sidetracked on newbie stuff instead of
It's
new games, so it's my bad.
Yo, it's all good. What I was going to say is, so what do we want to do for concluding remarks here? What do you got to say, Lessons? Getting new people into games.
I think it's a matter of, again, meeting people where they're at. You know, if you can get them as close as possible, they might be completely new to games, but they're not new to life and they have expectations, something like that. So if you can tweak those and walk them, it's like, okay, yeah, this game is not for you, but maybe this game is for you, and empower them, as Rafferty has said, and also sort of feed into what they really want. Maybe somebody wants a dark and brooding game where they can, every turn they can die from somebody slapping them across the cheek. You don't know that until you ask. So I think that's first rule of getting people to play other games is ask them what they think they want.
Yep, that's good. And Red, what do you got to say?
If they were a newbie, they would have no preconceptions. So my vote would be that if they had never played a game before, just lie to them and tell them it's D&D. They won't know. If you're playing with experienced gamers who say, who have been burned before, or who will know, say, like franchise games, or I don't want to learn a new game because learning isn't fun. You can broach it. You can say that. The thing is that if you are bringing something new to the table, for a lot of people, learning isn't fun. Gaming is fun, and being forced to wade through a new system with a lot of gotchas. A lot of people have had that. So if you are bringing people to the table, it's bring something simple. Remember your basic principles of building up and having fun. Encourage people to do new things that they couldn't do. In other contexts of other games. Like I know people say you can do anything with D&D, but that's not quite true. So if you brought them to a game that wasn't D&D, encourage them to do things like build vast vampire empires, or or how challenging it can be to try and live in a real world with real world constraints, or science fiction type stuff too. Like encourage them to lean into it. Always be encouraging about that. Don't just a lot of times people just grab a new game, throw it at them, and assume people will throw themselves into it like they did with D&D, and we already know that's not going to be the case.
Yeah, you got to respond to your players and let them know that you're having fun with the things that they come up with.
Read the room, ease them into it.
Yeah. Red, what do you got?
I think going off of what Lessons and Rafferty just said, knowing your players, easing them into things is great. I personally trash talk D&D whenever I have the opportunity. But I think in terms of like a realistic advice, first, I think it's a good idea to try playing a lot of other games. And even if you can't get groups together, if you expose yourself to other games, you'll get a better idea of what games are good at. Games, I think, excel at different styles of play, and having an idea of what would sort of match each player's style is useful. And you get that by just like looking around. And then when you're playing D&D with your D&D group and people are complaining about things not working the way they want them to, or, then you will have some information where you can say like, well, yeah, you know what? I played this other game and I think it handles this scenario much better than D&D does. And I would recommend you check it out because I think that would be cool. And I've had cases where entire groups have decided, yeah, that does sound cool. Let's try this game you've talked about. And it's been a big hit. And it's not always a big hit, but I think it is mostly about, reading the room, sharing your interests with people that you already are having fun with, and helping them broaden their horizons.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will, like, cons are coming up again. Paranoia. It's a role-playing game that you will not play as a campaign. You play it with complete strangers. You play it once. And it will teach you a lot about gaming, but don't think you could play a campaign about that. Like go to conventions and stuff. So,
but it's a lot of fun. You're getting to it.
You will learn a lot about players from playing one game of Paranoia, and that's it. You just have to play it once.
Oh boy. Well, with that rousing endorsement, that's all we have for today for this episode of Notes for the Aleph. We stream episodes bi-weekly Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern. You can join us live at Twitch on twitch.tv/Actus. We also stream and record weekly tabletop games at the same channel. And you can come join us when we start at 10 a.m., 2 p.m., and 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Sundays and Wednesdays. Norman Rafferty is a partner and writer for Sanguine Games. Check out sanguinegames.com, join us on the Reddit, Twitter, and look forward to the upcoming Book of Corals Ironclaw expansion book where you can engage your own pirate adventures. Don't forget to check out RedRabbit and book him for a game over on startplaying.games as RedRabbit. And Lessons, why don't you tell us where we can find you?
You can find me here on Rakta's channel, or Theta's channel, every Sunday, running Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition Into the Wild Coast, a great hot game, well bigger game. You can find my book over at Amazon, Knights and Stars for 99 cents. And you can find me on YouTube. The latest trailer upcoming project is up, Mass Effect Abridged, where I'm going to make a lot of fun and say funny comments about the stuff that's happening there. And hopefully people will actually find it fun. So I also have a Patreon that you can contact me over the YouTube page. So if you want to support that project. Link is in the Twitch chat. Let's put it up in there.
Yeah, go ahead and hand it out to the people. So while you go ahead and do that, everyone, thanks for being here. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and come see us all again. Till next time. All right.